And now we're joined by Kim Bobo. Kim, thanks for being with us today.
Daniel, great to be here.
Love your passion in that segment we just saw. And I just wanted to start for myself and for perhaps others to learn a little bit more about Interfaith Worker Justice. How did this organization come to be, and what's your main primary mission and so forth on that? So.
Well, I was involved in some labor issues and realized that often the religious community wasn't involved. And I had grown up in the church. It was central to who I was. I'd worked for Bread for the World for 10 years. I knew the power of the religious community. And I knew we were involved in hunger issues. We were involved in homeless issues. But we all knew that people were hungry or without homes because they didn't have jobs or they didn't have jobs that paid enough, right? And so it just seemed to me logical that the religious community should be on the front lines of those jobs and wage questions, as well as housing and homelessness and hunger issues. And so, you know, I started doing some work trying to involve the religious community, and you know, people wanted to help. They wanted to be involved. And so I first built a group here in Chicago that's now called Arise Chicago, and then we started building groups around the country, and then other groups wanted to connect to us, and before you knew it, there was a network called Interfaith Worker Justice that is really engaging the religious community around the country on low-wage worker issues.
Fantastic, yeah.
So Kim, it's funny when people find out that my husband and I have these jobs, that I'm a minister and he's a labor union organizer, they'll often say, wow, what a bizarre combination. And to us, it doesn't seem bizarre. There are many ways in which our work connects. You probably get the same question. Why involve religion and the labor movement? Where do you see the intersection?
Well, you know, the core values are the same, right? It's we want to help people. We want to make things better for people. Now, I often say that the things that people don't like about the religious community and the labor communities, those are similar too, right? You know, we don't always live up to our values. We sometimes talk more than we actually do, right? I mean, so the same things that are our weaknesses are also our strengths, right? I mean, we really have some core values, right? Help and love your neighbor as yourself. I mean, that's central to the religious community. It's also central to the labor movement. And you know, the sense of solidarity, the sense of sharing, the sense of, you know, really struggling together. I mean, those are core values for both communities. So I can see why people would question it, but it makes sense to me.
So on the shared values piece, I work with an interfaith organization called Interfaith Youth Corps. We often talk about how bringing together different faith traditions has a social capital aspect to it. How does that relate to the work that you're doing across faith lines with Interfaith Worker Justice? Well,
you know, actually one of the first meetings I did in Wichita, Kansas, we brought together religious folks and labor folks who work in the same town, and you know, Wichita's not that big, right? They started talking about why they did the work, and both sides started crying because they had no idea that there was this whole other set of folks who shared their core values, and yet they realized they weren't working together. And I think that's, we really, what's deep down important to us, you know, we share those values. And so finding ways to connect with labor leaders and religious leaders and bring those two communities together, you know, it just is more power for the work.
And of course, the workers who are in these struggles are all people of faith too, representing a whole diversity of religious backgrounds.
And often see their work as a sense of call. You know, you talk to nursing home workers, they see it as a sense of call to be there, right?
How do you facilitate that? You know, it's a dialogue, obviously, but you get out there and take action, right? You're on the street making, you know, we saw in the clip, I mean, how do you get people mobilized like that?
You know, I think it's hearing workers' stories. Right? It's not some ideological thing. It's really, you hear the story of workers and you're moved to do something about it. And you may never have been on a picket line before, but if workers need you to be there, you want to be there. In fact, you know, the clip you saw was from the Hyatt Hotel. You know, I went and I heard the stories of Hyatt workers who, you know, were not being treated fairly, who loved their job, who loved the company, but wanted to be paid fairly and wanted to be treated fairly and wanted to have a reasonable workload. And, you know, it made me want to stand with them. And so I think the way to engage more people in this is really to have people hear the stories. And somehow our religious communities, we allow people to often tell their family stories and their community stories, but we sometimes don't have quite enough space to tell people's work stories.
So one of the stories I remember from that same struggle was that when the workers were out there, it was a record heat wave that day, and the company turned on heat lamps on the protesters. I mean,
outrageous.
That was an outrageous story, and yet the religious community was able to speak to that and to name that as a justice issue. I think it was a very important moment in that.
Right. And, you know, my experience is for workers to have their faith leaders standing with them really affirms what they're doing, that really they're doing something that's not really just for them. It's really for all of their co-workers and really for the whole community. Anytime we're standing up to make things better for a large group of people, it really makes all of us better.
Now we're joined by Lou Weeks. When he was at Yale University, Lou became a student supporter of thousands of Yale workers who'd gone on strike. And shortly after his graduation, he became a union organizer. He currently serves in Chicago as the organizing director for Local 1, Unite Here, which represents over 300,000 members in the hotel, gaming, airport, and food service industries. Lou is also, I am happy to add, my husband. Lou, it's wonderful to have you here.
Thanks.
Share a story with us about the way in which you see the Holy Spirit or the work of the Spirit happening in the lives of workers or on the picket line.
You're going straight for the hard one.
Yeah.
So when you're on a picket line, it's kind of all out there. I loved what, you know, CJ had said about going to Wisconsin and having her wedding re-celebrated on the picket line of the Staley locked out workers. You know, there's moments when everything's at stake and you don't have secrets anymore and you're kind of raw. And it's not uncommon, it's very common that folks have, you know, will pray on the line, or folks will take care of each other on the line, or give each other money, or take care of each other's children. Things that in normal life don't happen when you go on strike can happen. And I've been lucky enough to be a part of that and have been honored enough to lead some of those struggles.
I remember our own children were both infants marching on the picket line and were cared for in those ways, and I'm sure you have similar experiences, Kim.
They march around the dinner table saying no more spinach, right?
Yes.
Oh yeah, don't let them hang out with our kids.
Yeah, the children of labor people are not shy about asking for what they want.
I remember I used to take you on dates and we'd go to demonstrations and you pretty soon started saying, okay, that's not a date.
No, that wasn't a date.
That doesn't count.
But it can be exciting. I know the sense of community and the way people come together. And it's incredible how in the labor movement people are able to cross so many of the divides, some of those divides being religious divides. What are some examples that you all have seen of that?
We regularly see interfaith prayers at events. So it's Christians and Buddhists and Muslims and Jews. Frankly, some folks who may not agree on a set of other things, but in terms of labor and wages and workers, all our traditions are very clear. I was meeting with a evangelical pastor recently, and he said to me, well, do we have to agree on all issues? And I said, absolutely not, right? We need to agree that workers should be treated with respect and dignity. And really that crosses all of our faith traditions.
So we may not agree on the ordination of women or gay marriage, but we can come together on that. Justice.
In our union, which is the Hospitality Workers Union, a lot of the folks who are servers or who work in the door stand or the bell stand at the hotels really are curious about meeting other people. And it applies when they get to meet their own coworkers as well, right? And so people are excited to have new experiences and eat new food, and folks will cook something that they made at home and bring it in and folks share it. It's really, you know, it's a part of the human spirit, and it shouldn't be a surprise that the immigrants that work in our industry share that, you know, interest as well.
And in a given week in your organizing here in the city, what are the different nationalities you come across?
Just dozens and dozens. At Loyola, where we just organized the cafeteria workers, there are 200 workers. People come from 20 countries and speak 16 different languages, just in a small group. And it's what we're seeing with globalization now. You know, it's an ongoing challenge to me. I can't speak any language but English and Spanish. I'm learning how to, you know, do chanting in Cantonese because that happens to be the people that are on the picket line.
Great.
Yeah. So some people would ask the question, you know, why would religious organizers or religious leaders get near organized labor? You know, there's so many flaws in unions and struggles like that, and there's a real hesitancy there. How do you make the case, and how do you help religious leaders to navigate that?
Well, religious communities want to help people. I think this really comes out of wanting to care for people. You know, my own church, we do a soup kitchen, right? And so we're always collecting money, but we don't have the power as religious leaders and as individuals to really raise people's wages and benefits. I mean, the work that was done in Houston with SEIU, where there were no unions in the janitorial sector, everybody made minimum wage. The union came in and organized 5,000 janitors, and for the first time ever, people got health care, and they got their wages raised, and they got paid for all the work that they did. I mean, I couldn't have done that out of my church, right? You couldn't do that individually, but with a union and by working together, you could help, and the religious community, by standing with those workers in the union, could help raise wages and benefits for 5,000 workers, right?
Kim, I loved your comparison earlier in our conversation between unions and the institutional church, saying they have some of the same struggles. They're flawed organizations, don't always live up to their standards. You could also say that both have shrunk in recent decades. And so the question would be, are unions relevant today? Some people would argue they had their moment, they helped people, but what do they do now? Have they outlasted their time?
I don't think so at all. I actually think it's a great time to organize. I think that people are being hurt in a lot of ways these days. Some of the issues of poverty that Kim spoke about earlier and that CJ spoke about, visiting people in Cabrini Green. You know, when you really organize and you visit people in their houses, you get to see the conditions people live in. And so this myth or this common idea that unions used to have their place, those folks haven't been recently to visit any poor people that I know of. I mean, anybody who would say, wow, something really needs to change here. People are working hard, they can't pay their bills, and they can't feed their kids.
Yeah, people at my church, they talk about, oh, I work at a grocery store, but I wish I worked at Dominic's, because if I worked at Dominic's, I would have benefits. And the reason they'd have benefits is because it's a union grocery store. So again, you know, you can talk to low-income people, and the difference between those who have unions and those who don't is so significant.
So help us see into those people's lives. Give us some stories about the kind of things that the workers are going through, that they come and talk to you about.
We were organizing a hotel here in Chicago and visited, there was a family that was from Togo, and I went and house visited them, knocked on their door, and introduced myself as a union organizer and came in. It was a one-bedroom apartment in the north side of Chicago, and there was about 12 people living in the place. And those folks they had rolled up mattresses and sleeping bags against the wall. There were, you know, a couple of kids on laptops who were doing their schoolwork, and there were people who had been able to move here, luckily because of their family, and they were going to make it, and they were struggling, and it was a very difficult struggle there at that place. But folks who come over from Togo live in conditions like that are much, much tougher than the hotel companies that they work for, actually. Same thing for other workers who come over from Mexico, maybe crossed through the desert, for other folks who've had to come over from China in the hold of a ship and now are organizing. You know, those are very, very strong people. And I don't think it's a hard call to say that we should, as people of faith, support them and really look out for their interests and their families and be on their side.
And the thing that both of you and also CJ Hawking are saying is the importance of hearing people's stories and getting out of your own little world or your own bubble wherever you were located. And one of the very exciting programs that your organization is doing is taking seminarians, so people who are preparing to be parish ministers, and exposing them to these issues through seminary summer. Can you say something about what you do with those people?
It's a great program. So we place these seminary and rabbinic students around the country working both with unions and with worker centers. And they go on picket lines, they go on home visits, they hear workers' stories. And you know, it's interesting because at the end of the summer, they come back and they say, you know, I thought I was going to be ministering to people, but in fact, they were ministering to me because I knew how to talk about God, but I didn't know really how to live out God in people's lives.
And what an amazing program, because say that rabbinical student has this experience, they might go out and serve a synagogue in a wealthy suburb, but they've heard those stories that Lou is describing.
Well, it is transforming, and right now so many of our seminary students come out of fairly affluent homes. They don't come out of working class homes. They don't come out of experience with unions, and so their only experience of unions is the negative things they might read about in the newspaper. And so it really challenges you know, their stereotype view on unions, and it's really significant.
So I'm seeing a lot of passion among younger people in the ministry and around these issues. What's pulling them in all of a sudden if they were raised in affluence?
Well, I think the fact that we have a 9% unemployment and 17% underemployment and unemployment
they're
combined.
They're going to have a lower standard of living than their parents for the first time in American history.
That's right, and I think
Absolutely.
the jobs crisis is really drawing lots of new people. And frankly, the attacks on public sector workers is just, I mean, people may think, oh, I'm not all that keen on unions, but the attack on the fundamental rights of workers to organize, we don't want to live in a society where you don't have the ability to come together with your coworkers and make a difference.
Well, that's a wonderful reminder that if there's possibly a silver lining to the economic troubles we've had, it's that these young people are turning to questions of justice.